Welcome to this webinar, Managing Project Stakeholders. My name is Dr. Ahmed Rashid. I'm a partner at Meirc Training and Consulting, and I specialize in project management topics. So again, our webinar for today is about managing project stakeholders. It's a very important nowadays topic in project management, with all the emphasis on stakeholders, specifically after the new releases of PMI, project standards, and even the Prince2 standards. So there are many different opinions on project failure, but all will contain something about stakeholders, communication, people, or teams. As a matter of fact, in the UK, the National Audit Office and the Office of Government Commerce listed 8 common causes of a project failure. And the third one is the most interesting one, which states lack of effective engagement with the stakeholders. So definitely, stakeholder engagement and stakeholder expectations management is a very important topic in the projects nowadays. If you Google reasons for project failure, definitely you will find many reasons related to project stakeholders, communication, people, or teams. So our webinar for today, as I said, will be the managing project stakeholders, and I have summarized the topics that we are going to share with you under 3 topics. We will talk about the overview of a project stakeholders management, and then we'll move into how to categorize and prioritize your stakeholders, and eventually we'll talk about how to manage your stakeholders' communication and resolve conflicts with them. So let me start with the first topic, which is an overview of a project stakeholders management. Basically here I will define project stakeholders from different perspectives, and I will also share with you the stakeholders management skill set, which is the skills that anyone needs in order to manage their stakeholders. So I'll start with the first basic thing, which is defining project stakeholders. There are hundreds of definitions of the project stakeholders, but the most common one, the most famous ones, are the ones introduced by the UK and the USA standards. So the UK government, they have their own methodology in managing projects, and they refer to it as Prince2. In their guide, in their Prince2 manual, they define stakeholders as the organizations or people who have an interest or role in the project and are impacted by it. So basically, they are referring to stakeholders as people or groups that have or believe they have legitimate claims against aspects of a project. When you talk about stakeholders, basically looking at it, stakeholders means that these are the people who have a stake, an interest or share of a claim in a project. And this can range from informal interest in the undertaking to a legal claim of ownership at the other side. So this is how stakeholders is defined from the APM perspective. APM stands for Association of a Project Management, which is again the publisher of a Prince2 guide, the UK methodology in managing projects. Now let me move on and define project stakeholders from the PMI standard. Many of you are aware that PMI stands for Project Management Institute, and it is based in the US. So in their manual, the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge Guide, they define stakeholders as individual group or organization who may affect or affected by or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, outcome of a project. So if you look into this definition, we can break it down into 5 components. And I want to concentrate on it because it really covers all aspects of project stakeholders management. So component 1, they are referring to individuals, groups, or organizations. And then they move into stating that these groups of humans are affected or affected by or may affect or perceive itself to be affected by certain decision, activity, or outcome. So let me move to all these components and quickly give you a brief on each one of them so that you clearly understand what do you mean by the project stakeholders. So component 1 is all about individual, group, and organization. And as you can see from this slide in front of you, there is different levels of stakeholder. The stakeholder can be at an individual level, group, or organizational level. When you talk about individual, basically, as it says, we have only one single stakeholder. And they don't have any competing interests here because we have only one stakeholder, and the communication lines between us and this stakeholder is one only. But if we have, if we are talking about group stakeholders, then we're talking about 2 or more stakeholders. And we're talking about multiple competing interests, because more than one stakeholders means that every one of them might have different interests in the project, and they might compete with each other in order to make sure that their interest is being met. And their lines of communication actually will be multiple. When it comes to organization, of course, we'll have more than one group and we'll have multiple competing interests. And the lines of communication, as a matter of fact, will be very complicated and complex, because we want to make sure that we keep open communication with all our stakeholders during a project execution. Moving to component 2, you see that it says stakeholders may affect. What does it mean they may affect? It means that these stakeholders can make a difference on the project. They have the option to make a difference. Anyone who can or does make a difference in a project for you should be treated as a stakeholder. There are so many ways how can a stakeholder affect a project. Just as an example, stakeholders can affect the project during the idea conception, during the initiation of a project. They can either approve or disapprove the project budget. The stakeholders can provide input into project scope, into the project planning, approving the project. They can either support or resist the project. So basically, there are different levels of impact or influence depending on the project life cycle phase, and definitely stakeholders may affect our project outcomes. Now, the third component says that the stakeholders may be affected by. When you talk about stakeholders, they might affect the project, but they also might be affected by your project. So ideally, we want all the stakeholders who are going to be affected by a project to have input into the process. But realistically, in many projects, this is not feasible. So sometimes we have stakeholders who might be affected by and influenced by the project, but they don't have any influence on the project itself. And later, when we introduce the stakeholder mapping matrix, you will see the difference between stakeholders who can affect or who can be affected by the project outcomes. Moving forward to component 4, basically we're talking about perception here. Some stakeholders might not have a real influence on the project, but they perceive themselves to be affected by the projects. And these are what I refer to as ghost stakeholders, because they think that they can influence the project, but as a matter of fact, they don't have any influence on the project, because the level of power actually is low. They have high interest in your project, but they don't have any authority or power over your project. And now moving forward to the fifth component, stakeholders, of course, may have the ability to influence decisions that others make. They might be involved with the entire project or just one aspect of the project. The activities they touch will vary, of course. The experienced project manager understands that the stakeholders are not a single homogeneous group with the same interests. Instead, they know and realize that stakeholders are unique individuals with their own sets of interests, fears, aspirations. So stakeholders sometimes can be the decision makers, but in other cases, they do not have any decision-making authority. They can only influence the decisions on the projects. Now, having said that, I want to move forward now after we defined stakeholders from different perspectives. I want to talk a little bit about the management skill set that we need in order to succeed in managing our stakeholders' expectations. So basically, we have 3 needed skills, and I refer to it as the balanced approach. A good project manager actually will deploy a 3-point approach to managing their projects and their stakeholders involved in the project. They need to balance between technical skills, business insights, and people skills. Now, what do we mean by each one of them? Technical skills actually relates to planning skills, organizing skills, using of softwares, using of key performance indicators. Anything that is related to the technicalities of the project can help in management of stakeholders' expectations. But at the same time, you need to have some skills related to business insights, which is basically the business acumen, which is basically the strategic thinking, the cerebral or the conceptual skills like planning, strategic thinking, problem solving, decision making, aligning the projects with the strategic vision, mission of the organizations and such. And at the end, you need also to have some human skills. We refer to them as people skills or interpersonal skills. These skills are very important actually, because they are the skills that will let and allow the project manager to know how to negotiate, communicate with the stakeholders and resolve conflicts with them. So even the PMI, the Project Management Institute, they changed their systems of claiming the professional development units for PMP professionals, and they are asking them now, when you want to claim PDUs, you need to claim PDUs, professional development units, that relates to technical skills, people skills, and business insights. which means that if you want to maintain your PMP credential, you need always to develop these three aspects in your career. You need to make sure that you are developing your technical, business, and people skills at the same time. So I want to end this topic by showing you the outcome of a nice research that was conducted in 2010. And basically you can see that they researched the competencies needed for successful project managers. And interestingly, I was talking a little bit in the previous slide about having the balance between technical, business, and people skills. And you can see the research outcome emphasized this thing as well. Because they are saying here that for a project manager to succeed in managing their stakeholders' expectations, they need to have IQ relating to intelligence quotient, intellectual capabilities, competencies. They need to have managerial quotient, which is MQ, and this is relates also to the capabilities of management and leadership and such. And also they need to have emotional quotient in order to succeed in their projects. In the slide, you can see more than 10, almost like 15 competencies, and they are clustered around these these three types of intelligence. So when dealing with the project stakeholders, you need to be familiar with all these competencies. You need to master them. And from the above list that you can see, cognitive abilities are broken into intellectual and managerial competencies. And they also have emotional and behavioral and motivational competencies. The outcome of this research was very interesting. They found out that intelligence competence, IQ, accounts only for 27% of leadership performance in a project, while managerial competence, MQ, accounts for 16%. And at the end, emotional competence, EQ, accounts for 36% of leadership performance, which tells us that emotional competence is therefore the most significant, more than even important than the IQ and MQ part. But again, you need to maintain a balance of all these skills in order to deliver a successful project and satisfy your customers. Let me move now to topic number 2, which has to do with categorizing and prioritizing your project stakeholders. So basically, this will be project number 2, topic number 2, and we'll talk about the dimensions of stakeholders categorization, how to categorize your stakeholders, and then how to engage with them. I'll introduce 2 tools here that will be very beneficial for you when you are categorizing and prioritizing your project stakeholders. So let me start with the first thing, which is identification of your project stakeholders. There are so many ways that you can deploy and use in order to identify your stakeholders. On the screen, I'm listing some of the ideas, such as brainstorming. I'm sure many of you are familiar with brainstorming. This is a great way for identifying stakeholders, where you can call some subject matter experts or project team members and conduct a brainstorming session in order to make sure that you come up with all the stakeholders and do not forget any of your stakeholders. This might be risky because if you forget any primary stakeholder, this might hurt the project at later stages. You can also use mind mapping, stakeholder list, which is a generic list, and it's a good starting point to identify potential stakeholders using stakeholder list, and it can be useful to kick off your stakeholder mapping actually. Also, you can look at previous projects to check who were your stakeholders and see if they are the same on the current project or not. So basically, you may be able to refer to what we call a stakeholder map or collect stakeholders from project plans or project initiation documents and such. Organizational charts and directories also can be very useful when you are looking for stakeholders. And usually we keep what we call prompt lists in our organizations, where we have like a list of all potential stakeholders in any kind of a project. At the end, you can see that you can have a list of stakeholders from standard categories such as the Project Management Institute, PMI, or Office of Government Commerce, OGC. Both of them, they always publish some stakeholder list in order to be able to identify your stakeholders. If anyone interested, let me know at the end, and we can email you also some list of the most common stakeholders in any projects in relation to every industry. So moving forward, I want to concentrate on this, the dimensions of stakeholders categorization. You definitely need to categorize your stakeholders because you need to deal with them based on their importance. Remember that all stakeholders are equal, but some are more equal than others. So the dimensions that we use usually to categorize our stakeholders are 4: power level, impact, interest, and influence. I'll give you a brief about each one of them, and then I'll introduce the stakeholder matrix. So power basically is the measure of a stakeholder's level of authority. So a stakeholder having high power, it means that they have high level of authority. And this refers to the stakeholders' overall organizational power. Do not confuse power with impact, please, because power means that a stakeholder is very influential in their organization, but they might not have any impact on your project. It might be a vice president who is very powerful and influential in your organization, but they don't have any impact on your project because they are not interested in it. So senior executives, by this definition, are likely to have significant power, but power, however, as I said, is not a measure of the stakeholders' ability to affect the project. There is a different word for this, which we will come now to it, which we refer to it as impact. Looking at impact definition here, impact actually is the stakeholders' ability to affect changes to the planning, to the project's planning or execution. Now, impact means that the stakeholder with high impact can really influence your project in their desired direction. It could be a consultant, for example, or a subject matter expert. And because they have their technical expertise, people listen to them, organizations listen to them, and they can have high impact on your project, although they don't have high organizational power within your organization. So remember that a high power individual may have limited impact on a project if the project is outside of that person's area of responsibility. And conversely, a stakeholder with significant impact on a project, such as subject matter experts, may hold very little power in the organization, but yet have very high impact on your project. Now we come to interest, and basically interest is the stakeholder's level of concern regarding the project outcomes, which means that a stakeholder with high interest is very concerned about the project, and they will be meeting frequently with you. They will be interested much in the outcome of the project because they are influenced by it, although they might not have any power or impact over the project. So this basically will help you to understand who are the stakeholders that have high interest in on your project. The last dimension is influence, and influence is all about the stakeholders' level of active involvement in the project. So a stakeholder with high level of influence will participate more frequently in team discussions, for example, meetings, and so on. And a stakeholder with low level of influence is not likely to participate in most team meetings. So influence refers to the level of engagement of stakeholders in the project. If you combine all these dimensions together, the four of them, you will come with different matrices. And the most famous one is the power and interest matrix. On the screen, you can see that stakeholders can be mapped against their power and interest levels. So they might have low or high power, this is the vertical axis, and they might have low or high interest, which is the horizontal dimension. And most international standards, they have strategies on how to deal with the stakeholders based on their power and interest level. So those stakeholders who are in the lower quadrant, which having low interest and low power, we recommend that you use with them minimum effort and only monitor them because they are not interested in the project and they do not have any level of authority over your project or any impact over your project. Of course, power can be replaced by impact if you wish. But the most important ones that you need really to manage them closely are those stakeholders who have high power and high interest. These are the stakeholders that can shut down your project at any point of your project. These are the project sponsors, maybe the CEOs, the executive management of your organization. And the challenge here is that you need to keep in mind that stakeholders will keep jumping from one area to another. So if you start the project with having a certain stakeholder in the monitor zone, having low power, low interest, after some time during execution or during monitor and control, you might find that this same stakeholder have higher power or higher interest, and you need to develop different kinds or types of strategies to deal with them. So the idea of having a power and interest matrix, it can help you to understand the power level and interest level of your stakeholders and design certain strategies to deal with them based on what area they exist in. So having said that, I want to move now to another tool that can be helpful in managing your stakeholders, which is the stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. Here you list your stakeholders. Let's assume that you have 3 stakeholders, and you need to list them, map them against the engagement levels. So usually we have 5 engagement levels: unaware, resistant, neutral, supportive, and leading. So what does these levels mean? When you talk about unaware stakeholder, it means they are unaware of the project and potential impacts of the project on them. Resistant means they are aware of the project and potential impacts, but they resist your project because they don't want to change anything. Neutral refers to being aware of a project but yet neither supportive nor resistant. Supportive means that they are aware of the project and the potential impacts and they support you because they need to have some changes, they need the project to succeed because your project success means that it will impact them positively. The last engagement level is leading, which is the stakeholder being aware of a project and potential impacts and actively engage in ensuring that the project is a success. So usually we list all our stakeholders and then we identify their current status and desired status. If there is a gap between their current and desired status, so we need to take some actions, develop some strategies to move them from where they are currently to where we desire them to be in order to have a successful project. The next slide, you can have a look at it later on, but basically it's the same of what we were talking about. Based on the engagement level, you need to develop some strategies. Either you use push communications with your stakeholders or consulting with them or participate, let them participate or partner with them. So this all depends on the influence level and interest level that your stakeholders will have over the project. And the last part under this topic is all about developing stakeholder register. So basically the stakeholder register will summarize all the things that we talked about so far. It will list all your stakeholders with their current level of engagement, their expectations, their influence level. You classify them, you map them into the stakeholder mapping, and this is where we can later on be tracking all their requirements and make sure that they are being satisfied. So usually in a project stakeholder register, this is what we have at a basic level. We have the contact information of the stakeholders, the categories. Basically, this characterizes each stakeholder across their power, interest level, and impact levels. And based on responses to these inputs, the project manager will rank the priority of each stakeholder. And then we list the project role, which is basically identifying the group stakeholders as part of and their role in the project. The status section refers to the project manager showing the stakeholders' level of support, and then the priority will be all about giving a score or a rating of how much time and effort the project manager should invest in this stakeholder based on their category, based on their impact, power, interest, and influence level. I hope you found this beneficial before we move to the last topic, which is really very important and interesting at the same time. After you categorize your stakeholders and after you develop strategies to deal with them, definitely you need to manage your project stakeholders' communication and conflicts, because always will have conflicts with the stakeholders. No matter how much you try to satisfy them, meet their requirements, always there are conflicts. But the idea is to look at conflicts from a positive perspective and know how to deal with them. So let me start with the communication and end this webinar by sharing something related to conflicts. So there are different communication channels that you can use with your stakeholders. You can use verbal communication, which is basically using the phone or face-to-face meetings or any video technologies in order to give them brief about the project and get their feedback about certain outcomes of your project. You can use nonverbal, which is basically all about facial expressions, gestures, body language, and both of them, frankly, they complement each other. They complete each other. You can use also written channels such as emails, papers, whiteboards. You can use visuals, and you can use kinesthetic or experiential tools and techniques such as case studies, hands-on practice or activities in order to communicate something to your stakeholders. So the advice here is that you need to use all of these communication channels in order to make sure that all of them are engaged with you. So I refer always to what we call a holistic approach of communication. You cannot depend only on one tool of communication. Some of these communication tools are considered as one way, others are considered as two-way. And you need to be flexible by using all these tools and techniques. As a matter of fact, when you identify your stakeholders, you need to consult with them and ask them which communication tool they prefer to be used when you are communicating with them. So that's why we recommend always that you use a holistic approach to communication. So it means you deploy and use different communication channels. And reality might dictate that the project manager must use one channel, such as written communication or such as meetings. So you need to understand the requirements of your stakeholders. In the next slide, there is a quick comparison between them. You can refer to it later on, but basically you can tell that the communication channels that are considered as two-way communication channels, such as meetings in person or through virtual tools such as video, they are more rich than one-way communication such as emails or maybe like memos and papers and documents, because here you can see the person, you can get more information, you can see non-verbal messages as well. So remember, when you are using certain communication channels, you need to understand the advantages and disadvantages of each communication channel that you are using. I will end up this webinar by the last topic, and then we will accept all your questions and answer them, hopefully. So while you are communicating with your stakeholders, you will be expected to face some conflicts, and you need to be able to deal with conflicts. So that's why I want to end up with introducing 5 conflict management styles. But before that, do remember that conflict is when 2 or more of your stakeholders will have differences in ideas, views, and they are not ready maybe to understand or accept each other ideas or views. So majority of us perceive conflict as negative, while it can be positive. As a matter of fact, according to the British Unit Study, Institute of Education in University of London, they defined conflict as the opportunity to improve situation and strengthen relationships. So conflict can be toxic, but it can be tonic as well. Thomas and Kilman actually, they introduce a conflict management style that can be used to assess one's dominant style for addressing conflict. And not only it is important to know what relationship or situation is causing the conflict, but what's more important than that is how are you going to resolve the conflict. So we must then decide whether we are satisfied with our current approach or if we would like to change anything in the way we are managing our conflicts. So let me start without any delay those conflict styles. I'll give you a brief about each one of them, and if you're interested to know your conflict style, please do email me, and I will make sure to send you a questionnaire or assessment that can tell you which one is your primary style and which is your secondary style. So basically there are 5 conflict styles. We refer to them as avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, and collaborating. Let me start with the first one, which is avoiding. Now, the avoiding style basically means to avoid or postpone conflict by ignoring it, by changing the subject, by not handling it. And stakeholders who used to avoid a certain conflict, they think that it will fly away and just vanish, but this does not happen. This can be actually a good solution for buying time or just to let things, just settle down and then you move into resolving your conflict. But sometimes avoiding a conflict can cause more damage to the relationship between stakeholders rather than building the relationship. If I want to give it a motto, I will say that it is I lose and I want you to lose. This is where it is no way. This is where stakeholder is saying if I ignore the problem, it will go away, but sometimes it will not. Others might say if I confront the problem, I may hurt someone else's feelings, and that's why I don't want to confront the problem. I don't want to collaborate on solving the problems because people might misunderstand me. A third mentality could be why bother? It won't change anything. But all of these comes under avoiding style. We're not saying that avoiding is not good, but you need to be careful when to use avoiding, because if you always use avoiding in resolving stakeholders' conflicts, then this might again not reach you anywhere, and it might be just postponing the problem but not solving it. So when do you use conflict? Well, usually avoiding style. Well, usually avoidance should be used as a conflict handling intention when the issue is a trivial, silly, or more important issues are pressing. When you perceive no chance of satisfying your concerns, then you might be moving into avoiding conflict style. It's also useful to let people cool down and regain perspective sometimes, so that's why we use avoidance. When gathering information is also important for us, so we wait until we gather the information and then we start confronting the problem. And sometimes we use avoidance because we want the other person to relax, the other person to calm down before we start talking about our conflicts. So the disadvantages of avoiding style is it might let you miss some opportunities to clarify issues. It might, you might be labeled as being, coward or not being able to resolve your conflicts. Now, moving to accommodating style, accommodation style means to surrender once, to give in one's own needs and wishes to accommodate the other party. Now, this might sound easy, but at the same time, remember, if you always use accommodation in resolving your conflicts, then people might take advantage of you. So this is where you say, I will lose to let the stakeholder win. This is where you tell the stakeholder it will be your way, not my way. But do remember that if you always keep doing that, stakeholders will take advantage of you, and this is again not a win-win situation. So when do we use accommodation? We use accommodation to build social credits, okay, with others. We use accommodation to minimize loss, okay, and we use accommodation when we want harmony and stability in our relationships with stakeholders. So this is basically when do we need to use accommodation. But the disadvantage of accommodation style is that people might look at you as a doormat, that you're always giving in. Again, they will label you as a fixer, but not someone who collaborate with them. So again, there are disadvantages and advantages when you are using accommodation. Now, moving forward, compromising. I'm sure that many of you heard of compromising, which is the most common conflict resolution techniques, which means that let us split the difference. It's a midway, not my way or your way. I want to win, but I want you to win. But we look at it as a low win-win. Why? Because it means you need to find middle ground in which each stakeholder is partially satisfied. We look at it as win-win because you did not get 100% of what you want as a project manager, and the stakeholder did not get 100% of what they want. So keep in mind, we compromise only when we cannot collaborate on a certain issue, only when we cannot cooperate on a certain issue, because compromise is not considered a high win-win situation. This is where we are meeting at the middle ground. This is where we are saying, let us split the differences. You choose to give in something so that the other party can give in something else. What's better than compromising, actually, is collaborating, which we will talk about now. But do remember, we do use the compromising in certain situations. So sometimes as a backup for collaboration, when we cannot use collaboration style, then we use compromising conflict style. And you can see here that the next style is competing style. Competing style basically telling your stakeholders, I want to win and I want you to lose at the same time. This is where you're saying might makes right. This is where you're saying it's my way or the highway. This is where you say there's only one solution, which is my solution. I am right and you are wrong. Now all of this comes under competing. We are not suggesting that competing should not be used, but it should be used with very careful analysis, because it means that you are asserting your viewpoint at the expense of others. It means that you are asking others to just give in to your viewpoints and to your judgments. So do remember that competing can be very risky, and we do not use it unless it is really needed, because it can hurt and damage the relationship between you and your stakeholders. And the disadvantages of competing also, that you will be perceived as using a dictatorial approach, autocratic style, and it will increase the power differential between you and others. So you use it only when you need a quick, decisive action. You use it when you need to make a decision that is needed, that is a must, but it's unpopular with your project stakeholders. The last conflict resolution technique is the best actually when you have time, which is collaborating style. Now, collaborating style means we are working together to find a mutually beneficial solution. So collaborating is basically not my way, not your way, it's our way. I want to win and I want my stakeholder to win. This is where we can find a solution that works for both of us as stakeholders and project management team. This is where you ask for the other person's perspective and you understand them, you empathize with them, you sympathize with them. So once we find a common ground, we can work from there. So please do remember that collaboration can be time consuming, it requires effort, it requires empathy, sympathy, and that's why we don't recommend collaboration in every situation. Collaboration, we use it when the matter is really important for all parties. Like, for example, we want to change something in the methodology of our project, or we want to introduce something that is new, like templates or plans, or change the project plans. So this is when we use collaborating. And remember, it's all about integrating your views and other people's views. So this is where you use collaborating to find an integrative solution, and we use collaborating when the matter is important to all parties. The last slide before we start receiving your questions is just summarizing all of them. I listed the 5 conflict resolution or management styles, and you can see that avoiding and accommodating, they are unassertive styles, because you are giving in for the other party, but you have high level of cooperation when you are using accommodating and collaborating. On the other hand, competing and collaborating, They are a very assertive style because you are fighting for your rights. When you are competing or collaborating, you are defending your rights. And you can see that competing and avoiding, you are being uncooperative because you are just concentrating on your interest and not the other stakeholders' interest. So I thank you for being good listeners now. And if anyone have any questions, any comments, please, we are here to answer your questions and address any comments that you share with us. So I can see that some already sent their comments while I was delivering the presentation. So some were asking for sending the free slides, and definitely you'll get all these webinar slides and you'll get a link. You will receive a link shortly so that you can download these slides. So you'll have it as a PDF format. Okay, any more questions, any more comments? Ahmad Ismail is asking for stakeholder templates. Definitely, Ahmad, please send us your email and I will share with you many project stakeholders templates that can be useful in useful for your projects. Unfortunately, we do not have certificates of webinars attendance, but we can share with you the presentation slides. Rehab is asking an example of ghost stakeholders. Ghost stakeholders, Rehab, are stakeholders that you don't identify them at the beginning of the project. So let's say that you brainstormed with your project team members and you came up with a list of your stakeholders. But for one reason or another, there are certain stakeholders that you forgot to include in your list. And at a later stage, you remembered them and they will impact your project. So we refer to them as ghost stakeholders because they were forgotten by the project team members and they were not identified at the beginning of the project. So Saeed is saying, what is the major risk of the project from the point of view of stakeholders? It depends, Saeed, on what stakeholders are we talking about. Some stakeholders might be interested in the budget. Some of them are interested in the time, meeting deadlines and such. Some of them might be interested in different aspects of the project. We always say that the beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So tell me who is your stakeholder, and then we can tell what are their areas of interest. Okay, I'm going through the questions. Okay, bear with me for 1 second. Yes, Ahmed, you are absolutely right. Ahmed is commenting that conflict resolution is strongly linked to emotional intelligence. Do you recommend to undergo EQ? As a matter of fact, yes, I do. You know, a project manager will not deliver successful projects if they don't maintain a balance between their IQ and EQ. Your EQ, intelligence quotient, actually can get you into any organization, but your emotional quotient is what promotes you inside the organization. At higher level of a project, if you are a project director or a vice president for projects, for example, no one will care if you know how to do things using your hands or use Microsoft Project or certain software or use Gantt charts and such. But they do care about your emotional quotient, whether you can motivate the project team members, whether you can think strategically or not. You understand how your behaviors impacts others and such. So definitely, I would recommend that you go under EQ assessment. And if you are interested, I can share with you a very nice assessment that we have, and it can give you exactly how is your emotional intelligence working and what are the areas for improvement and the areas of strength that you have under emotional quotient. And nowadays, we are always promoting to have a high emotionally intelligent project managers because it really makes a difference if the project manager is emotionally intelligent or not. Ahmed, we will be sending you the templates. Ahmed, this is Saeed actually is asking a very important question. Is the technical background of the project manager mandatory, required to manage the project? There are two schools of thought, Saeed. Some say that the project manager need to have the technical expertise, technical background to manage the project itself. So if you are managing an IT project, you need to be an IT expert. If you are managing an engineering project, you need to have an engineering background. The other school of thought telling you that project management is a management discipline. I don't need to have the technical background as long as I know how to manage a project, as long as I know how to plan, how to develop project charts, Gantt charts, and such. And most international standards, they support this view, and I personally support it. You can be, a great technical expert, but you don't know how to manage a project. But on the other hand, if you don't have the technical expertise, this can be complemented by other team members who are more expert than you with their technical expertise, and you can supervise the project. So basically, having a project management skills is more important than having the technical background from my point of view. If you have both, this will be wonderful. If not, then we definitely need you to have the project management skills. Many organizations, they have their own PMOs, project management offices, and they hire full-time project managers that can support other functional departments in managing their projects. Although these project managers do not have technical background, but they help the functional departments in managing their projects, be it in IT, in business development, and marketing, in any other area. So in short, in summary, there are two schools of thoughts, but we recommend a project manager always to be having strong project management skills. If they have technical background, that will be nice. Right. Again, Rahab is asking, when talking about impact, do we have any parameters of criteria, or it depends on the scope of the project? There is no specific criteria, Rahab. All what you need to understand is impact means how much the level of impact of your stakeholders over your project. Do they have high or low impact? So impact means that they can influence your project, they can be impacted by it as well, because they have authority over your project. As I said, you just need to understand the difference between power and impact. Power means that I have high authority in the organization, but I cannot impact your project. Impact means that I have high level of authority on your project. I think we do have some criteria, but it's more or less subjective criteria, not an objective one. I can share with you some later on if you send us your email. Stakeholders are interested party of the project. Yes, they are. Okay. Definitely, Lucina. We will send you some templates. Thank you for sharing your email. Please share your email and we will send you the templates. Any more questions? Okay, Rahab sent her email. I'll be waiting for a few minutes before we end the webinar, just in case anyone have one last comments, questions. Okay, Muhammad, noted. Thank you, Hani Al-Ghamidi, for your comment. Thank you, Ahmed Ismail. Okay, I'm reading your comments. Thank you, Lucina. You're welcome, Rehab. If anyone has any further questions or comments, please do email me. My email will be also on the webinar slides later on, and we can send you our email. If you email the company, I'll send you my email. Anytime you need us to share any templates regarding project management, project stakeholders, you can also let us know. Nami, definitely the conflict is not because you are a project manager. The conflict can be between you and any stakeholder. It can be between project managers and project stakeholders, between stakeholders among themselves. So that's why the conflict management styles can be used in at different levels. Okay, thank you all of you. I think thank you so much. There are different classifications, Saeed, of a project depending on the budget, whether it is low, medium, or high. I do have an Excel sheet that can help you in classifying your project based on the project budget, the project effort, and different criteria. So I will make sure also to email you this, just in case also you have my emails. If you need, you can send me a reminder, but inshallah, I will be sending you some useful templates as well for project classification. Wallah, Hani, this is a very difficult question. How often does conflict happen between stakeholders and PM? If the PM lacks EQ and IQ, you can expect so many conflicts between them and stakeholders. When you are having the right level of EQ, emotional quotient, IQ, intelligence quotient, you are skilled in managing the conflicts, you can use different conflict resolution techniques, definitely the frequency of the conflicts will drop down. I will tap my email. Some of you are asking for my email, so here you go. I'm tapping my email now, and hopefully you can receive it. Okay, I'm tapping my email so that you can also text me or email me anything you need. Okay, so I just sent my email. Please note it down and let me know if you need anything from my side. Thank you, Rahab. All what is left is to thank all of you. I wish you a happy and pleasant weekend ahead. And please do keep in touch. If you need anything, I'll be more than happy to be supporting you with templates or answering your questions. So again, I thank you so much for your time and thank you for listening to this webinar and enjoy your weekend and have happy projects. Thank you so much.
Meirc.com